Yeah, I've been birding I started in 1970. So where are we now? That's 56 years I've been birding now. So I've seen, I'm a really keen bird watcher. I've been to over 60 countries, seen a third of the world's birds. So I'd love to be able to see them all, but I'm not sure there's going to be enough life left to be able to do that, or money, because it's very expensive travelling to some of these countries. But I certainly want to see a lot more species. Actually, when I got out of the car this morning, there was a Mistle thrush went bonkers in these trees. So I suspect they're nesting somewhere nearby, and it's the alarm call. So it's our biggest thrush. You know, bigger than the blackbird. Yep. Lovely spotted breast, but the alarm call sounds like those, you know, those old football rattles. Sounds like when I'm parked in here anyway. I just can put my wellies on. Yeah, they're up in here somewhere. Actually, it's really interesting seeing it. Hello, what have we got? Oh no, there's a Mistle thrush just dropped off the wire over here. See if we can see it in a minute. Oh, there we go. That's our Mistle thrush. I don't know if you can zoom in on that. Yeah. Okay, we'll try and get a bit nearer. Well, I think it's interesting because I think that's one of the regular breeding birds here in the ground is Mistle thrush. So it's our largest thrush. Yeah. They're an early nester, so it's now flying across the field there to the fence posts. It almost looks reptilian in a way because the back's quite scaly with all the, you know, obviously the spotted breast. The old country name is stormcock because it will perch on the top of a tree, and it has a really beautiful, far-carrying song, real thrush-like song, and it often sings just before a storm comes in, hence the name. But they're an early nester, and they nest in like a fork of a tree. So they typically go into these trees right at the beginning, nest right in the fork, and it's a nice little nest with sort of moss and sticks and leaves, and so it's quite well hidden in amongst the trees. And then and obviously they lay eggs and then raise their young on there. But so the alarm call, I say, is if something like a magpie comes in or a sparrowhawk flies past or something like that, they get this really loud, just like a football rattle blasting away, and they quite often dive bomb the predator to drive them away from the nest. Yeah. So that's quite good. And then later in the year, because it's not a common bird anymore, it's a species of high conservation concern now. There was a skylark singing out here, and they'll then, several pairs and their youngsters come together later in the year. So you can sometimes get a flock of up to 30 Mistle thrushes in the late summer as they're foraging around, and then in the spring they break up to go nest. So yeah. It's a cracking, but it's a really nice bird to see in this area. And at this time of the year, as your dawn choruses are just starting to build up now, we've got song thrush and Mistle thrush and blackbirds and robins all starting to sing. So yeah, it's a cracker. I don't think it'll nest in the field here, but it might well nest in some of on the edges, or potentially even the edge of this habitat around the edges is quite attractive to them. It's just interesting to see a little bit of the valley from this view here. A lot of the Cotswold Plateau is, it's quite flat on top and great big open fields, no hedgerows, little blocks of woodland and what have you. And they've got some birds on there, but we here, because we've got a really varied landscape, so we've got a combination of small and large fields, there's hedgerows everywhere, blocks of woodland, it's a mix of arable, dairy, sheep, lots of fruit and veg growing, permanent pastures, things like that. And I think that combination makes it really attractive to wildlife. And we've got a lot of birds here that you perhaps wouldn't find elsewhere in the Cotswolds. So yes, it's certainly very rich in that point of view. There are some old bits of woodland, certainly. Yeah. I think a lot of the forests have disappeared now. Yeah. If you go further south into the Cotswolds, in fact not a million miles from here, you get lots of beech woods and things like this. Mm-hmm. But we're a bit further north from all of that point of view, so a lot of our woodlands we're all planted, I don't know, some of the oldest ones I guess 100, 150 years ago maybe. Little patches of them. There's lots of ash and willow and poplar woods and things like that around here. But yeah, we're not really in the part of the world where you get the lovely oak woodlands that you might get on the Welsh borders or further across into Wales, but we're not too far away from that. We do have a little bit of heathlandy type habitat down near Cheltenham. Yeah. Cleve Common is a nice area, but yeah, we have that. It's very much of a sort of I'll say almost a man-made landscape here, but it's not quite like that, but it's certainly heavily influenced by local farming and what have you. There are some nice little wild areas dotted around, but say, you know, if you scan around here, you can just see it's very green, and that's because the grasslands around here, I would say, are mainly, well, the current terminology is modified grass. So it's improved grassland. I know when I was quite young, I was thinking, oh, improved, does that mean it's better for wildlife? And it's actually completely the opposite. Improved means it's been improved from an agricultural point of view. So a lot of these grasslands, they're species poor, the grass is very fast growing, it's designed for feeding cattle and sheep essentially. So all of those lovely wildflower areas have disappeared. I think we've lost something like over 90% of our wildflower meadows. So you get this very bright green fields and landscape, whereas if this was lovely old grassland, there'd be all sorts of yellow patches in there and brown patches and things like this, waiting for the wildflowers to come up. But it's not. And even if you scan, you know, even in the distance there's not much that's old anymore. So trying to restore wildflower grassland would be a real key for the estate here. And I think it's highly possible as well. There's obviously management techniques to do it, but there's enough room to be able to do something quite meaningful. You know, a lot of people try and do a little wildflower meadow here, a little one there, or a corner patch, and that's okay. But you know, with large open fields like this, you can really achieve quite a lot. Yeah. One of my favourites is something called pignut, and it's related to things like cow parsley and hogweed and stuff, which are very common. But pignut is an indicative of old grasslands. And it's called pignut because the root forms a little hazelnut, and you can eat them. And I guess it was called pignut because the pigs would have loved them. So they would have been rooting around in the soil, in the grass, and all that rooting around creates little bare patches, which allows other wildflowers to seed into them. So that's like a natural management, and they will be after the little nuts in down at the root of the pignut. So. Again, that's often a component of the seed mixes you put down, yeah, which is quite good to try and re-establish that. Yeah, we've got quite a few beekeepers. A couple of our friends are keep bees, and it's a very popular thing these days. It's fantastic to see. So yeah, there's a bit of activity I just saw there in one of the hives. Yeah. Still early in the season yet. But again, if we've got wildflower meadows here, yeah, that'll really benefit bees. I mean, at the moment there are 4 hives, but you can imagine there'll be more bees if we get more wildflowers. Yeah, it's a bit of a quiet, windy day, isn't it? I can't actually see here. And it's quite early in the season still, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, it could well be, yeah, exactly. Actually, the thing, we're just walking past here, there's a little bit of a ditch here. So again, this is kind of indicative of of old farming practices. In fact, there's a spring coming out, just noticed, right by us. So again, these damp conditions. So a lot of the agricultural practices drained a lot of these fields because they wanted a I was going to say high quality grass, but they wanted a fast growing grass, nutrient rich for cattle and sheep, which isn't not particularly brilliant for wildlife. And what they don't want are boggy conditions. So they don't want sort of these call it a wet flush. So they drained a lot of the fields to try and make them drier to make it easier for the grass. But what we want here on the estate is a combination of that. So where some of these sort of springs are, it might be that we'll do some a series of little dams, for example, to create some, that'll back up and create a slightly damper area behind them. And of course we've got the springs over in the ponds over to the left of us over here. Actually, if you look across this bit of grassland here now, you can see there's a lot more sort of tussocks, and there's a bit of yellow. So this is obviously not quite as improved as the field next door, for example. So this is a bit more interesting, and this would be the kind of place where we might want to do this to get some wildflower seed into here, create a nice swathe of wildflowers on both sides of the driveway going up towards the hotel. Yeah. So this will lend itself very nicely to that. In fact, there's quite a lot in here, and I can't see any. It's not really the best time of the year. Sort of May, June is the ideal time to come and look for wildflowers. But, yeah, there's quite a few holes. I can see there's bittercress in here. That's indicative of quite damp grassland. So what we would probably do here, because it does look like it's going to sit fairly damp, is that we would, and I can feel it underfoot actually, it's a little bit springy, we'd focus probably on a damp grassland seed mix for something like this. I mean, it's been around for a long time. It was originally a farm, and obviously as being a farm, it was here to produce food. So, and the Cotswolds is famous for its sheep, very much of a sheep area. Those have declined over the years. You've got dairy and beef cattle coming in, and the dairy herds have largely disappeared from here. There's still a few beef herds dotted around, and there's certainly plenty of sheep. But that would have declined over the years. Arables then come in, so oilseed rape, wheat, barley, oats have pretty well disappeared. Sometimes you get beans appearing in fields. Peas used to be fairly common. Certainly some 10, 15, 20 years ago, we used to quite a lot of pea fields, but they've all disappeared now as other crops, other cash crops come in. So yes, that will all have changed. And it would have been interesting to see those early grasslands. I can imagine when it was a farm, some of these grasslands would have been quite fantastic. So, but again, agricultural changes, and so a classic example is that the difference between where we're standing now and the field next door is a really obvious difference there in how it's been managed and maintained over the years. You've got the brook along here. There's a lovely old willow tree, an old ash tree further down there with a big cavity in it, and I'm pretty sure it's either had or has got barn owls. And whether they nest or not in there, I don't know. But there's certainly barn owls around this area. There are several pairs of barn owls kicking around. And again, there are little old stable blocks and barn blocks with boxes in. And there are several boxes on some of the trees in there. But this would be a natural hole. And yeah, barn owls are certainly a regular scene. And that would be a lovely one for if people are wandering around the estate of an evening, pretty well any time of the year, they might just catch a glimpse of a barn owl floating past. And that's the species that benefits from these this kind of habitat that we're standing in right now. These longer tussocky grass areas are great for small mammals. So short-tailed voles, bank voles, common shrew, things like this. They require a nice diverse grassland mix because again they'll be feeding on the invertebrates that are brought in with the botanical diversity. And those small mammals are very attractive to things like barn owl. So if you've got just a plain bare grass field, like there are all over the place around here, no good. They do like these little rough areas. And then they'll be preying on those small mammals and then hopefully nesting nearby. We've also got a pair of kestrels kicking around this area as well. It's another bird that requires small mammals primarily to feed on. So the more that we can do to get that nice wildflowery type grassland, the better for those species, which would be great. Yes, and I wouldn't cover it in trees unless we wanted to go and have a big block of woodland, which is a possibility. But having said that, we're in an area with quite a lot of woodland. There are no massive forests that we were talking about earlier on, but there are fairly large blocks of woodlands not too far away. But grassland, because I said earlier, we've lost so much of our wildflower grassland since the Second World War. They've just gradually disappeared as we need to grow food. So, and wildflower grasslands just got in the way effectively. They don't produce anything from a food point of view. So they've disappeared, but bringing those back, so I think grassland of that type is more important than woodland. But there's no reason why we couldn't, some of these corners, or even maybe where we're standing, for example, could have a little block of woodland in it, and a little block over there, and then the hedgerow connecting the two, and then maybe we plant in that corner another little corner copse of woodland. So you have these little copses of native trees dotted around. It's a woodland species. We hopefully will hear one later on today as we're walking around the estate. Because there's a couple of nice blocks of woodland, and I've certainly heard one singing in there. And it's called a chiffchaff because its song, it's what they call onomatopoeic. So its song is its name, or its name is its song. And the song is chiffchaff, chiffchaff, chiffchaff. But if I can mimic it, it's sort of a like that sort of do chiffchaff, chiffchaff, chiffchaff. So that typically appears. They've been in about a week. And then the numbers will build up, and then various other migrants, blackcap, willow warbler, some of the warblers will come through. Swallows typically appear first week of April, same time as the house martins. They'll be around, and if we're particularly lucky, we might get a cuckoo. Cuckoos would have been very regular a long time ago, but the numbers of cuckoos have declined massively in England, unfortunately. Again, possibly climate change. That I think they're common further north and up on the moorlands and places like that, but as a bird we normally get 1 or 2 cuckoos every year coming through. So you never know, on a nice spring morning walking around the estate, typically early May, normally the first ones up will maybe get a cuckoo calling as it passes through the area. You have that combination, can't you, of sort of formally landscaped for its sort of, well, for its landscape value and to look attractive, and then you can have the sort of the wild areas where the sort of the wildlife will come up into here, but further down there you'll be at one with nature.
Yeah.
Old grey wagtail calling down there now, just heard. That's a lovely, so it looks like our pied wagtail, except the back is grey, but the underside is yellow. So that's typically a wagtail of small streams and rivers and things like this, but will often feed around ponds and lakes.
It's quite a view.
Certainly is. And I think it's just great how the light changes, doesn't it, as well? So this morning a little bit cloudy, a little bit of sunshine, and it's become a bit overcast now. And of course you get other days when it's just bright sunshine and you can see for miles, and you get foggy days, and yeah. And when it does snow, it becomes a magical winter wonderland.
I'm definitely bringing a sled.
Yeah, it's a great hill for sledging. Yeah, this is almost a rewilding in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, because if you look across the field here from where we stood, you've got, again, this improved field. Just beyond there, on the neighbouring farmland, you can see a nice little corner of sort of scrub land, and I can see there's long grass in there and various other things. That's quite attractive from a wildlife point of view. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's foxes living in there. So yes, so this grassland, this has been grazed by sheep, and I'm sure that the grass is quite short at the moment, so the sheep are off because there's not enough nutrient in it. The sheep get moved around the area. I think they'll bring the sheep back on later in the year. But these sheep grazed grasslands are not very good from a wildlife point of view. They, as you can see, it's just a monoculture of probably perennial ryegrass, fescues, things like this. There's not much to it. And because there's not much to it in terms of botanical diversity, you don't get the invertebrates that's associated in there, or your creepy crawlies and your butterflies and your moths and your bees and your hoverflies and all the rest of it. And it doesn't grow very tall because the sheep are grazing it down all the time. So because of that, because there's not much invertebrate life, you then don't get many small mammals, you don't get many small birds. Small birds will attract bigger birds preying on them or whatever, or it might be if it's long tussocky grass, you might, when we first came here, curlews used to breed in this area, but they've been gone 15, 20 years now. It's a lovely wading bird. It's our largest wading bird as a wader. Long legs and a big, long curved beak. So in the winter time, they all migrate to the coast, and they're all feeding on the mud flats and the estuaries around our coast. And then in the spring, about this time of the year, they would normally, those that are breeding inland will head back inland. So a population heads up onto the moors of Derbyshire and the Pennines and whatever to Scotland, but quite a large number would have come inland to typical habitat like this. So they're looking for these long tussocky grass fields. So, but the area I'm thinking of is slightly north of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, not far from Edge Hill, there's a nice area. And there used to be, I think there's still one pair hanging on in the South Cotswolds. But when you think 30, 40 years ago, there were dozens of pairs, and now we've only got one. It's a real shame that they've disappeared. Grey partridge was the same. We've got, I can't remember the last time I saw a grey partridge. When we first moved here 24 years ago, several pairs of grey partridges, but they've now disappeared. Lots of pheasants and red-legged partridges, which are put down by the local estate for shooting, and they get everywhere, but sadly the greys have gone. Well, I suppose the biggest winner, well no, I was going to say, we'll come on to red kites in a minute, but yeah. One that has come back, in fact there are two species that have come back to the North Cotswolds on their own, without any influence for people, and that's buzzards and ravens. So the North Cotswolds Ornithological Society, NCOS, did a breeding bird atlas back in the early 1980s. Across the, I think they had 8 to 10 kilometre squares. So from the north here down as far as, where did they go? Down to just around Cheltenham area. So they 10 kilometre squares, and did a check of all the breeding birds over a 4-year period to see what there was, and then amalgamated all that and produced a little book on what was there. I think if ever a buzzard or a red kite was going to nest anywhere, it would be in something like one of these big old trees. You never know, one day you'd see the big nest. I mean, they quite often start off as an old crow's nest. So a crow will typically nest in just one pair will make one big nest. And then a buzzard or a kite will build it up so the lad sticks to it and gradually make a bigger and bigger platform. Because obviously a buzzard is a lot bigger than a crow in terms of being able to cater for the chicks. But they do like these isolated trees. And buzzards, one of their main prey is rabbits. And of course, in all of our lack of understanding of the environment, we introduced myxomatosis as a way of controlling the rabbits to stop them eating all of our crops. What we didn't realise is that that terrible disease killed off huge numbers of rabbits, and that was a staple food of buzzards. But as myxomatosis is still around, and it's a disease carried by a flea, and it typically lives in the burrows of rabbits. So it would normally, so when the rabbits go underground, and in particular in the winter when it's very cold, we always had snow and ice in those days, 40, 50 years ago. So rabbits lived underground for quite a large part of the year. So the fleas would bite them, pass the disease onto them, and they would then die. It's a horrible disease. But with climate change, rabbits don't need to be underground quite so much. So they're above ground a lot more often now. And I think that combination has allowed the rabbit population to really grow in quite large numbers. So you've got a lot more corpses where things have been run over. So again, there's more bits of carrion on the side of the road. So again, the buzzards can pick that off and the ravens can pick that off. And they've just spread back into the area. So we have buzzards nesting. In fact, there's a little block of woodland just over here. There's a pair of buzzards nesting there. They're not yet nesting in the block of woodland that belongs to the estate, but there's always a possibility they'll come in. Ravens are just over the hill on the nearby estate, and they're regularly seen dotted around. And then with the red kites, which again we'll talk about in a bit, it's almost like being in mid Wales in a way. So a lot of the species that you had to travel to the middle of Wales, to Powys or around Devil's Bridge, around that area, to see ravens, buzzards and red kites, you can now come here to the estate and see them here. Look at this, that's a buzzard feather. I said to Paul, because the red kites in the late summer, they fly over and they're molting, so they're dropping the tail feathers and some of the main primary feathers as they molt them out. I said to Paul, God, you ought to collect some of these up and turn them into the hill quill. So you could have a little feathered quill in each of the rooms with a little biro stuck in the end of it, something like that.
That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.